I've always believed that love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about boundaries or expectations. It finds you, even in places you never thought to look. For me, that place was my twin brother, Caleb. Growing up, we were closer than close. People would joke about how we seemed to have a language all our own. It wasn't just that we could finish each other's sentences. It was like we could feel each other's emotions. If he was sad, I'd feel a weight on my chest. If I was happy, his smile would be brighter. But as we got older, something shifted. I started noticing things about Caleb that made my chest tighten. The way his hair curled when it was wet. The little smirk he'd give me when he thought he was being clever. It wasn't the way a brother was supposed to feel. And that terrified me. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just because we were so close. But the feelings only grew stronger, and I noticed Caleb acting differently around me, too. There were moments when his hand would linger just a little too long on my shoulder, or when his eyes would meet mine, and I could swear he was searching for something I wasn't ready to admit. It all came to a head the summer before our senior year of high school. Our parents were out of town for the weekend, and Caleb and I decided to camp out in the backyard. It was something we'd done since we were kids, lying under the stars and talking about anything and everything. That night, though, the conversation turned serious. "Noah," Caleb said, his voice soft. "Do you ever feel like you don't fit in? Like there's something about you that you can't share with anyone?" I hesitated. "Yeah, all the time." He turned to me, his face lit by the faint glow of the flashlight between us. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know where I end and you begin, like what I feel for you. It's more than just brotherly, you know?" My heart raced. Hearing him say it out loud made it real. "I know," I whispered. I felt it too. For a moment we just stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Then, slowly, Caleb leaned in. I felt his breath on my skin, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. And then it happened. His lips brushed mine, hesitant at first, as if he was testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, he kissed me fully, his hand gently cupping my cheek. It was like time stopped, the rest of the world fading away until there was nothing but us. When we pulled back, we were both breathless. "Is this wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it feels right." From that night on, our relationship changed. We didn't talk about it much. There was no need. Our connection went beyond words. But in the quiet moments when no one else was around, we allowed ourselves to explore what we felt. There were stolen touches in the dark, a hand brushing against mine under the table, a fleeting embrace when no one was looking. Every moment felt like a secret treasure, something only we could understand. Of course, we knew we had to be careful. Our parents were strict, and the town we lived in wasn't exactly progressive. To the outside world, we were just two brothers who happened to be incredibly close. No one suspected that behind closed doors, we were something more. It wasn't always easy. There were times when the weight of our secret felt like too much to bear. But every time I looked at Caleb, I knew it was worth it. He wasn't just my brother. He was my soulmate. It wasn't just that first kiss under the stars that changed everything between Caleb and me. It was the 1,000 little moments that followed. Every touch, every glance, every word whispered in the dark felt like a rebellion against the world that would never understand us. But it also felt like freedom. The days after that night were electric. I'd catch Caleb looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite describe. Was it love? Lust? Both? I didn't know, but I felt it too. One evening, a week or so after our kiss, we found ourselves home alone again. Our parents had gone to visit relatives for the weekend, leaving us with the house to ourselves. Caleb suggested a movie night, just the two of us. It sounded innocent enough, but the unspoken tension crackled between us like static electricity. We sat up on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us. Caleb sat closer than usual, his knee brushing against mine. I tried to focus on the screen, but all I could think about was the warmth of his leg against mine and the way his arm casually draped along the back of the couch, his fingers dangerously close to my shoulder. Halfway through the movie, Caleb shifted, leaning in to whisper something. His lips were so close to my ear that I could feel his breath. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I replied, though my heart was racing. He didn't move away. Instead, he let his hand slide down, brushing against my shoulder before trailing along my arm. It was subtle, but it sent a jolt through me. I turned to look at him, and our eyes met. Without thinking, I leaned in, and so did he. Our lips met, this time with more confidence than before. It wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was hungry, desperate, like we'd been holding back for too long. The popcorn bowl tumbled to the floor as Caleb pulled me closer, his hands gripping my waist. My fingers found their way into his hair, and for a moment nothing else mattered. The rules, the fear, the consequences, all of it melted away. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. Caleb's forehead rested against mine, and he smiled in that way that always made my heart skip a beat. "We probably shouldn't be doing this," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I know," he replied, "but I don't care." Neither did I. From that night on, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. It was like we'd opened a floodgate, and there was no going back. We stole moments whenever we could. A lingering touch as we passed each other in the hallway, a stolen kiss behind a closed door. One night, Caleb slipped into my room after our parents had gone to bed. He closed the door quietly, locking it behind him. "What are you doing?" I whispered, though I already knew. He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely audible. I shifted to make room for him, and he laid down beside me. For a while, we just lay there in the dark, our breathing the only sound. Then, slowly, his hand found mine under the covers. "We're going to get caught," I murmured. "Not if we're careful," he said, his lips brushing against my ear. His hand moved, tracing a path up my arm and across my chest. My breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips finding mine in the darkness. This kiss was different, slower, deeper, more intimate. His hands explored places they hadn't before, and I let him. Every touch felt like a declaration, a promise that no matter what, we were in this together. As the months went on, we became experts at hiding our relationship. To the outside world, we were just two brothers who happened to be close, but behind closed doors, we were something so much more. We found creative ways to steal time together, late-night drives where we'd park somewhere secluded, our hands wandering as the world slept around us, long hikes where no one could see us stealing kisses in the woods. But the secrecy started to take its toll. There were moments when the weight of our secret felt unbearable, like when our parents would ask why we didn't date, or when friends teased us about being so weirdly close. One night, Caleb and I were sitting on the roof of the house watching the stars. It was one of our favorite places to escape, where we could be alone without fear of being overheard. "Do you ever wish things were different?" I asked, breaking the silence. He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but then I think about how lucky I am to have you, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." I leaned my head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around me. In that moment, I knew we'd figure it out no matter what. Because what we had, what we were, was worth fighting for. For months, Caleb and I lived in the exhilarating chaos of our secret. Every stolen kiss, every lingering touch, every whispered "I love you" in the dead of night felt like a victory against a world that could never understand us. But the deeper we fell into each other, the more dangerous it became to hide. It was a Saturday night when everything began to unravel. Our parents were hosting a dinner party downstairs, and the house was full of chatter and laughter. Caleb and I had managed to slip away to my room, locking the door behind us under the guise of needing to grab something. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding. Caleb stood in front of me, his eyes filled with that same hunger I'd come to know so well. "We shouldn't," I whispered, though the words felt weak even to my own ears. "We've been saying that for months," Caleb replied, stepping closer. "And yet, here we are." He closed the distance between us, his hand finding my waist. The sound of voices drifting up from downstairs faded into the background as his lips claimed mine. It was urgent, desperate, like we were racing against time. His hands moved up under my shirt, his touch igniting every nerve in my body. My fingers tangled in his hair as I pulled him closer, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. But then, the sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted us apart. "Someone's coming," Caleb hissed, his eyes wide. We scrambled to compose ourselves, my heart racing as I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was just one of our parents' friends heading to the bathroom. I exhaled a shaky breath, but Caleb grabbed my arm, pulling me close again. "Relax," he whispered, his lips brushing against my ear. "We're fine." For now, we were. The real trouble started a week later. Our father, a strict and traditional man who rarely showed his softer side, had been growing suspicious. I'd caught him giving us odd looks during dinner, his eyes narrowing whenever Caleb and I laughed at some inside joke or shared a glance that lingered too long. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Caleb slipped into my room, as usual. He was wearing a pair of sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, his hair messy from the shower. "You're late," I teased, sitting up in bed. "Dad was asking questions," he said, shutting the door quietly behind him. I had to wait until he went to bed. My stomach twisted. "What kind of questions?" "Stuff about why we don't hang out with other people more. Why we're always together." He sighed, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I think he's suspicious." I reached out, my hand resting on his knee. "We'll be careful. We always are." But that night, caution was the last thing on our minds. Caleb leaned in, his lips finding mine in the darkness. This kiss was different, more intense, more possessive. His hands roamed my body, and I let myself get lost in him, in the way he made me feel like nothing else mattered. We didn't hear the footsteps this time. The door burst open, and the light from the hallway flooded the room. We froze, my heart stopping as our father stood in the doorway, his face a mix of shock, anger, and something I couldn't quite place. Betrayal, maybe. "What the hell is going on here?" he barked, his voice thunderous. Caleb jumped back, his face pale. "Dad, it's not—" "Don't lie to me," our father shouted, stepping into the room. His eyes flicked between us, taking in our disheveled appearance, the closeness, the undeniable truth of what he'd just seen. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The air felt thick, suffocating. "Get out," our father said, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you. Downstairs. Now." Caleb and I exchanged a panicked glance, but did as we were told. We followed him down to the living room, the silence heavier than anything I'd ever felt. He stood in front of us, his arms crossed, his face hard as stone. "I don't even know where to start," he said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "Do you have any idea what this could do to this family? What people would say if they knew?" "Dad, please," I began, but he cut me off. "No! You don't get to explain this away." He turned to Caleb, his eyes blazing. "How long has this been going on?" Caleb hesitated, his hands clenched at his sides. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Don't lie to me," our father snapped. "I saw you. I'm not blind." There was a long, tense silence. Finally, Caleb spoke. "We love each other," he said, his voice firm. "It's not something we chose. It's just who we are." Our father's face turned red, his jaw tightening. "This is wrong," he said through gritted teeth. "It's sick." "Dad," I said, stepping forward. "We didn't plan this. We didn't want this. But it's real, and we're not going to apologize for how we feel." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought he might hit me, but then he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I need time to think," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Go to your rooms. I don't want to see either of you right now." We didn't argue. We retreated upstairs, my heart pounding as I closed the door to my room. Caleb followed me in, shutting the door behind him. "That was bad," he said, his voice shaking. I nodded, pulling him into my arms. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. For the first time, our secret wasn't just ours anymore, and the consequences were about to change everything. The days after our father caught us were some of the most agonizing of my life. He barely spoke to either of us, his silence cutting deeper than any words could. The house felt suffocating, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Caleb and I tried to act normal, to go about our routines as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible. Every time our father looked at us, his eyes burned with anger and disappointment. One night, a week after the confrontation, he called us into the living room. Our mother sat beside him, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she'd been crying. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," our father began, his voice cold, "and I've decided this family can't go on like this." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying one of you needs to leave," he said, his words like a punch to the gut. "This thing between you two isn't just wrong, it's unnatural, and I won't have it tearing this family apart." Caleb stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You can't just throw us out," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I can, and I will," our father replied. "You're adults now. You can fend for yourselves, but you're not doing it under my roof." Our mother started to cry, but she didn't say anything. She didn't defend us. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, as if she'd already given up on us. Caleb turned to me, his jaw tight. "We'll leave," he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. "But we're leaving together." Our father's face twisted in disgust. "Fine," he said. "Get your things and go." That night, we packed our bags in silence. I could feel the weight of Caleb's anger and my own heartbreak pressing down on us, but neither of us said a word. It wasn't until we were in the car, driving away from the only home we'd ever known, that the reality of what had happened finally hit me. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We'll figure it out," Caleb said, reaching over to take my hand. "We have each other. That's all that matters." His words gave me strength, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. We found a small apartment in a neighboring town, using the money we'd saved from part-time jobs to pay the first month's rent. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, but it was ours. For the first time, we could be together without fear of judgment or discovery. The freedom was intoxicating. We no longer had to sneak around or steal moments in the dark. We could wake up beside each other, share quiet breakfasts at the kitchen table, and fall asleep tangled in each other's arms. But freedom came with its own challenges. Money was tight, and the weight of our decision to leave home hung over us like a storm cloud. There were nights when I'd lie awake, wondering if we'd made a mistake, if we'd been selfish to put our love above everything else. Caleb always seemed to sense my doubts. He'd pull me close, his voice soft in the darkness. "We're going to be okay," he'd say. "As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." And somehow I believed him. Months turned into years, and slowly we built a life together. Caleb got a job at a local hardware store, while I worked at a diner down the street. We kept our relationship private, presenting ourselves as two brothers who were just trying to make it on their own. But behind closed doors, we were free to love each other fully. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered promise felt like a victory over a world that had tried to tear us apart. We never heard much from our parents. Our mother sent a card on our birthday one year, but it was signed only with her name. Our father never reached out. It hurt, but we learned to live with it. One evening, as we sat on the couch in our tiny apartment, Caleb turned to me, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I don't want to hide anymore," he said. I frowned, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want us to live our lives without fear," he said. "I don't care what people think. I love you, Noah, and I'm tired of pretending that's something to be ashamed of." His words hit me like a wave, washing away the fear I'd been holding on to for so long. "I love you too," I said, my voice steady, "and I'm ready." From that moment on, we stopped hiding. We didn't shout our love from the rooftops, but we also didn't go out of our way to keep it a secret. We were just two people living our lives, loving each other in a way that felt as natural as breathing. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Years later, Caleb and I built a life we were proud of. We moved to a bigger city where we could blend into the diversity of people living their truths. Our love story wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated, full of pain and sacrifice, but it was ours. Because in the end, love isn't about rules or expectations. It's about finding someone who sees you, who knows you, and who chooses you, over and over again, no matter what. And Caleb and I chose each other. Always. Don't forget to subscribe to support us and hear more stories like this. Your love and encouragement mean the world.